Hey, how are you today? This is Josh Patrick, and you're at Cracking the Cash Flow Code. And my guest today is Donato Tramuto, and I probably massacred his name, which I'm very good at doing. But he is the author of a new book called The Double Bottom Line. And I'm really curious. I know what triple bottom lines are, but I'm not really quite sure what a double bottom line is. So we're going to bring Donato on and have him explain it to us. Hey, Donato, how are you today?
I'm doing great, Josh. And by the way, you did a great job on my name.
I got it right. Wow. I guess
Perhaps
after
better than me.
I guess after 330 tries, I'll get it right every once in a while. so, so tell me, um, book is titled The Double Bottom Line. What is a double bottom line?
Well, I think the bottom line, and it's interesting because the subtitle is how compassionate leaders captivate hearts and deliver results. I think too often as business leaders, we think it's only about profit. And what I think is now happening in our society is the reality that you have to engage the hearts. And you can do that and also be profitable. And we show in the book how to do it. And it's not just the definition according to Donato. We interviewed more than 40 world leaders who have provided a contextual insight of the meaning of the double bottom line.
So, can you give a definition of what double bottom line is? And you said you have some examples, and can we go through a few of them?
Yeah, let me give you one great example. Bruce Broussard, who is the CEO at Humana, one of the largest health providers, we interviewed Bruce along with 40 other leaders. And first of all, what we realized is that compassionate leadership is not about just showing empathy, it's about empathy in action. And a great example of Bruce during the pandemic, he had picked up an article and he was reading about how the CEO at Walmart had converted their parking lots into a place where individuals could drive their cars to the parking lot and watch movies, realizing that the realizing that the customers probably were all alone in their homes. And so Bruce Broussard said to himself, wait a second, I have a building in Louisville, Kentucky. It's empty. The parking lot is empty. We have these office spaces. So he said, I'm going to not only be empathetic about what's happening with the pandemic, and I know I have to meet shareholder return, I'm going to convert the office into a center where people can bring their computers if they need to be fixed. I'm going to convert it into a place where people could gather for social gatherings, do it safe. And he called his HR executive and said, listen, don't tell me how it can't be done. Let's understand how we can get to a yes. And that's what he did. He converted his office building. The double bottom line is still watching your bottom line in terms of being profitable. And you can do that and still provide for the employees that captivate their hearts in a way that really addresses some of the challenges that they may be experiencing. And there's many, many examples in the book that we highlight from a variety of leaders that we interviewed.
So, so essentially, it sounds to me like if you care about the stakeholders in your business, that's a sort of a definition of being compassionate. But you need to go another step is not just care about them, but exhibit care by doing things that would show folks you do care about them. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I think that what we have to kind of distinguish, and let's kind of get rid of the myths to what it means to be a compassionate leader. Myth number one is that it's weak leadership. It's not weak leadership. In fact, it's strong leadership. You feel better about yourself. And so many of the leaders that we interviewed left their offices at the end of the day when they were practicing compassionate leadership and they felt good about themselves. Myth number two is that many people think that it's kind leadership. No, it's actually being strong. In fact, I introduce a formula that compassionate leaders, what they practice is that they first are tender to their employees. They get to know the employees to build the trust. That second T, how do you get the trust? And then the third T, you can be tenacious. So we kind of turn it upside down. So many leaders feel they have to be tough. Well, then they go around with a pooper scooper because they're unable to gain the trust. And so what we're really helping leaders understand is by being compassionate, by doing things that help you to get to know your employee population, you get the trust, which allows you to make the tough decisions because you've got to be a tough leader in many, many different situations. And so we try to dismiss a number of the myths that have been out there with respect to leading with compassion.
Yeah, my experience is those who are tough often pretend that they've never made a mistake in their life. And as a result, they come across as being really unauthentic to their employees. And often, if you're going to be too tough, and I can tell this from personal experience because it was me in my first 10 years in business, your employees are going to sabotage you if you're tough. If you're
It
fair,
is a,
that's a different ball game.
and that's what we really walk through. And it's very funny you say that is that most of the research that we did, and by the way, Josh, we did two different research. We did the interviews of 40 plus leaders, hundreds and hundreds of hours of, live interviews. And then we went out there and we interviewed 1,500 people across the United States to ask them their viewpoint of compassionate leadership. First of all, without getting into the data, I can tell you that there is a huge disconnect. You have the 1,500 employees who truly believe that if you are compassionate as a leader, it leads to collaboration. Yet those same employees indicated that the workforce is more competitive than collaborative. And so there is a huge gap in what our leaders are thinking compassionate leadership is versus what the employees. So if nothing else comes out of this book, let me tell you, the reality is that there is a need to re-examine how our leaders are leading versus how the employees want to be led. Now, let me get to your notion about toughness and fairness. That's exactly what we found in the survey, is that employees wanted their leaders to be tough, no question about it, because there's a lot of big decisions, but they wanted them to be fair, they wanted them to be inclusive, and they wanted to know that the leaders cared about the issues that are outside the company. And I think so many issues in the last couple of years, and certainly COVID-19 has demonstrated that the leaders that really understood the issues that their employees were facing were the leaders that were able to handle the tsunami that happened in the business world with the pandemic. And the leaders that, quite frankly, didn't know how to navigate with the employee population fell flat on their face. And so I do think the time has come to realize that there has to be a balance of toughness with fairness and with the sense of kindness and compassion.
So I have a concept I've been using for years, which I call leading from the back. And leading from the back essentially, I think, fits in with what you're talking about, whereas the leader doesn't sit at the head of the table, they sit in the side of the table. The leader doesn't lead the conversation, they participate in the conversation. And if they're really, really good, they only ask questions. They don't sort of give their opinion until everyone else has had a chance to weigh in. Does that fit in with what you call double bottom line leadership?
Absolutely. In fact, what we now propose, and by the way, this is going to shock a lot of your listeners. What I propose in the book is culture doesn't come first anymore. And for many years, I was CEO of different companies, and all the leadership books that came out, it's not culture, it's trust. And the way you get trust trust is through inclusion. By including the insights, not only from the age group that's within your age range or age band, but including the young, the middle age, and the older population. And look what's happening right now, Josh. Here in the United States, the average age of the CEO is 59 years old. And by the way, that's also true of our elected officials in Washington. The average age is 59. Yet when you look at the employee population, 50% of the employee population is under 40. And in the next 5 years, that's going to be 75%. And so you have a younger population being led by a older leadership population. And that's where the disconnect comes in. The older leadership population feels that they have to have all the answers. And what we're proposing now is to get rid of those biases. In fact, I devote an entire chapter on the biases that we bring into the workforce. And one of the biases we bring in is that we think that somebody who's 23, 24 years old hasn't yet paid their dues. And so when they speak up, or perhaps when they discuss with their leader a market issue because they're within that age group that you're trying to really service or sell a product to, they get dismissed. And so you raise a very interesting point, is that we have to be willing now to ask more questions than to think that we have to have all the answers. And that's part of the double bottom line.
Yeah, my experience is if you get really good at asking questions, you almost never have to give anybody instructions on what to do because they'll figure it out themselves.
Yogi Berra once said, you don't want to make the wrong mistake. And, we're going to make mistakes. We're going to make mistakes as leaders, yet are we willing to admit that we made the mistake? And that's the double bottom line. That's the compassionate side of a leader, is to admit to your team, I was wrong. And this is what I learned. That openness, that sense of vulnerability is really what captivates hearts and will drive loyalty, will drive commitment, and will drive collaboration, which will get you to the second part of the bottom line, and that is delivering sustainable profits.
So you just used a word which I rarely hear in the context of a business conversation. And it's one that I think is so incredibly important that if leaders don't get it, they're never taken seriously, which is vulnerability.
Yeah.
We think we can't be vulnerable because we'll be seen as being weak. The truth is the opposite is what happens. When you're vulnerable, you're seen as being strong, and I have a lot of personal experience behind that issue.
Well, let me give you an example of myself. For years, I'm a product of having lost my hearing at age 8, and I failed the 5th grade. And I struggled through school because of my hearing loss. And I never wanted to admit that to anyone. As I got into the ranks of being a CEO, I was one of the few gay CEOs in the healthcare industry, and I didn't want anyone to know about that. How wrong I was. And it wasn't until 2014, when I was receiving the Robert F. Kennedy Human Rights Award, that I got up to the podium and I said to myself, shame on you. You're about ready to receive this prestigious award with Hillary Clinton and with a few other, well-known, human rights activists, and you're unwilling to admit who you are. And what I did, Josh, changed my life. Before I got up to the podium and read my speech, I announced to the 2,000 people in the audience, and there were 200 of my employees there, I announced that my partner of 25 years was in the audience. Everyone got up and applauded, and there was a little bit of a humor side. Afterwards, my employees said, thank God we know this about you. We thought your life was boring. Well, all kidding to the side, I had more employees who came to me and said, Donato, you have revealed who you are, and it makes you now more as one of us. And that was a really big eye opener. And so I don't want to say that I've always been a compassionate leader. I'm sure is not one of perfection. And once you liberate yourself to reveal your story, it opens up the opportunity for others to share the story.
Well, folks, we are going to have to cancel this Facebook Live because our guest keeps freezing. And I apologize for that. And we will start over again at some point in the future because it's an interesting conversation.